All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being here today. We have a great group of faculty here with us to talk about the roles of students and instructors in the online environment. And I've provided them a list of questions, but we will definitely take questions from our audience throughout the presentation, and we'll have time at the end to go over questions as well. So please feel free to add your questions to the chat as we go through, and we'll just kind of make this a conversation and really enjoy each other's time right now. So we have a variety of faculty with us from several different colleges, and I love it when we have that breadth of experiences and backgrounds. So everyone here has been teaching online for quite a while, and so we're going to get their perspective on a series of questions. I'm going to go ahead and stop my share, and we're really just going to be in a conversational process, and we don't have a presentation necessarily. So to get started, I have provided these questions to the panelists, and we'll just ask them to go through and kind of share their thoughts as we go. So the first question was, what changes have you noticed in the role of a teacher in the online environment compared to being on campus? So I'm going to start with Bob, and I'll just kind of call on everyone as we go. So go for it.
Hey, greetings, everyone. I guess my comparisons um, are not necessarily totally normal. Because I teach all in the graduate school, and so our classes don't even meet. You know, like a class that meets 3 times a week or something like that. Sometimes we meet only every other couple weeks. But when I first got to K-State, in 2012, all my classes were in person, Bluemont, or at a school district with our partnerships. But slowly we started integrating, put some things on KSOL, but most of the content was not that way. But it was really clunky to have people join, they Zoomed in class, and then we also had some in person. It was just so clunky, and just over time, the demographics just shifted so much that I do 100% online classes now. And the biggest change for me is it does take a lot more preparation time, and materials you may have used, I may have used before, I had to change because it was put online. But absolutely, I prefer doing it online, to be honest with you. I teach barefoot. I'm barefoot now, and it's awesome because then class is done, you hit the button, and you go up to your kitchen. So I do like that aspect.
Excellent. Thank you. Teresa, can you give us your input on what you've noticed about the role of the instructor?
Sure. So a little bit more background on me. I teach mathematics, undergraduate mathematics. And so unlike you, I don't get reoccurring students. I get students maybe one. I teach college algebra online and general calculus online. So at most I get them 2 classes in a row, but that's very unusual that I would do that. I would agree with what Bob says. You want to front load your class. Pretty much now that I've done it several years, I have it all set to go at the beginning of the semester. And I have students tell me that my class is one of the most organized classes. And I think it's because it is up there for you right up front. But my biggest change as a teacher is I no longer get content questions very often. I no longer get how does the quadratic formula work? Can you help me with this problem? I get more scheduling questions. Can you extend this date? What that assignment's due such and such. Can you adjust that? So really, I hardly ever get any math questions anymore. It's more just course management questions. And so I found that that was kind of the biggest change for me.
Interesting. Do you think that's more because you've laid out your course really well and they can go back and forth and that kind of thing? Or are
I
they hesitant to ask questions?
I think that they're very hesitant to ask questions, and maybe because it is math, it's hard to type questions over email, so to say. So maybe that's because they don't know how to type it, I guess. Maybe that's part of the question, but I always offer to Zoom. And honestly, anytime I do get a question, I just write it out on paper. I take a picture of it with my cell phone and I send it to them. So I'm almost always encouraging them, no matter what question it is. If you can't get the course management system to work, if you can't get the website to work, screenshot it and send it to me, because a picture is going to be way better than you trying to describe it, whether it is an actual math question or whether it's just a course question.
Excellent, thanks.
Mhm.
Elaine, would you share your experiences?
Laura, thanks. And thanks to all of these scholars here. I admire you all, and I know that we're in a really transition period at the university and in our higher education. Having taught online since 2003, I feel very comfortable and confident about the online environment, and including the technological changes that Bob's alluded to over many years. And I know Sue has seen those too. My teaching experience right now is also teaching faculty how to move into an online environment. I'm also a chair. So I do teach graduate level courses. I have taught online undergrad, and then I'm also helping our faculty staff. So the changes that I've seen as the result of COVID-19 and moving everyone to online is my role has changed as far as being the care provider, and being consistent. Content is wonderful. I think our students early on, years ago, were really oriented to completion and content. Now they're oriented to consistency and caring. They want to know that the faculty member is able to care for them, their changes, their lives, and making the structure of the course consistent. Teresa, I think your remarks were really centered on that the more consistency students feel in the online course, the more comfortable they are, because maybe our courses now are the only consistency in their lives. The other thing that I've discovered in the past several months is that production porn is not the point. And I think many of you read the Higher Education or the Chronicle article about when COVID required us to work from home, there was this assumption that we'd all be productive. We'd be productive in writing, we'd be productive in scholarship, and we'd be more productive in courses. We'd load the course up with a whole bunch of good stuff. And that's really not what our students are wanting, really. And I don't think we are wanting it either. It's exhausting. So the other change is I'm encouraging our faculty to maintain content, maintain how they teach, and don't be too concerned with all the flourishes and all of the doodads, because our students just want to know that we're consistent.
That's a really great point, Elaine. It doesn't necessarily need to be super fancy, and you definitely want to be thinking about, you know, the amount of content that you have. Is it really appropriate for the number of credits that your course is? I mean, I find articles all the time and I keep, oh, I want to share this and this and this, and then, whoa, I'm overwhelming people. I need to take a step back. Thanks for sharing that. Jeremy, why don't you jump in?
Okay, so I had to
There we go.
for a second.
Unmute, yes.
And my mute thing was hiding, so I couldn't find it. So I would say there are two big things. One of them, which is something I wrote beforehand, is that, so for me, I've taught and I still teach a lot of classes in person and online. So usually a couple of courses each semester in person and at least one if not 2 courses online. So I'm doing 2 courses online this summer, just as an example. It's usually the same class, although the same kinds of classes, although I do an art and insects class, which is what this stuff is back here, that's just online. Cute butterfly over anyway. One of the things that I like to do in the classroom is obviously get to know my students, connect with them. You're able to spend a lot of time with them before and after class. And so while they're not using office hours, you're actually engaging with students a lot, right? And so you can be a dynamic facilitator in the classroom and before and after. But one of the things that happens now in the online environment is that it's much more difficult to do that. And as Teresa was talking about earlier, in terms of students asking questions about content, those do tend to go away. So I think that was a really good observation about what happens. Students are much more hesitant to utilize help. I have multiple help sessions each week. It's rare if students take advantage of that. I do think my courses are reasonably well organized and structured. They know what they're doing. They know what their expectations are for assignments. This will lead into my second point. And so I sort of worry that does the effort and structure and clarity actually preclude students from wanting to interact? Because I know how to do this assignment. Why do I then need to come and ask for help? I can get the points I need for that assignment. So anyway, I've been struggling with that for a while now. What's the best way to sort of engage in a asynchronous environment that has optional synchronous times, right? That's sort of the blend that I've been doing. The other point, which goes back to Elaine's point about content and the kind of content. One of the things that teaching online forced me to do was really reevaluate everything that I do when I teach, right? So normally you say, okay, here's the lecture I'm going to do. You outline a normal class face-to-face. Lots of times you're just rambling like I'm doing now, and students may not get it, right? So what really are the important things that you want them to know 6 months from now, a year from now, or 5 years from now? And if you go back with that lens, which is what I did, and said, okay, these are the really critical things that we want to do. Focus the lesson, like the video that we make for the class for that particular topic. Everything that we do is usually less than 6 minutes. I do put a lot of effort in production, so I put a lot of effort into production. So because I want it to be as engaging and dynamic as possible, but it's not an overwhelmed amount of content, right? It's very focused. And so the class now looks like they're getting everything they need, but essentially it's what you want them to know a year from now, as opposed to just lecturing for an hour. So we have a lot of faculty did the, let's put up a camera and record myself for an hour and talk and put that up. Students hate that. And so I think I talked way too much already, so I'll
You're fine.
stop. But so for me, it's those two things. So it's now, instead of being a dynamic facilitator, it's a distant facilitator, and it's mostly focused on, can they progress through the class, deadline issues and things like that, as opposed to content. And then really refocusing on what you want the material to be in the course. This old idea that I'm just going to lecture about anything I want and expect the student to learn it is an old and outdated idea. That's it.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on one question that Katie just posted for you specifically. You had said everything we do is less than 6 minutes. She was also asking, you know, she's been doing synchronous meetings with 20 minutes of lecture and the rest with discussion and
Mhm.
interaction. But you're saying 6 minutes. Could you expand on that just a little?
Yeah. So, sorry about that. So
No,
I'm
no,
talking
no, no,
about just in
nothing wrong.
terms of the, if I make a video for a lecture, right? Sometimes there could be 2 or 3 videos. And so I went through just as a example, went through the AQ course a couple of years ago, and their online structure of short videos to the point actually really cemented that sort of, I enjoyed going through that sort of structure. And so that's what I'm talking about. So
Excellent.
anywhere from 1 to 3, there might be an occasion where there might be 4 videos, but usually 1 to 3 videos per lecture that are focused, specific to the point. Yeah. And then
Great.
later questions that we have, we'll get to how I structure assignments around that to avoid other issues. But
Sure. Thank you. You make a couple of really good points that how do we capture that 5 minutes before lecture, 5 minutes after lecture, right? Those can be such valuable learning opportunities and community building opportunities with our students that those are lost in the online realm. And how do we reformat that or capture that? I've heard a couple of people who have said that they do some sort of community building exercise before they start their synchronous session, right? So the students are all just sitting there chatting during, you know, as everybody's logging into Zoom or something like that. And so that's a way to do it. But it's very challenging to find the way to get those students to engage in that. I don't want to miss our opportunity to have Sue share her thoughts here before we move on to the next question. So Sue, I know you're also a productionist, as Jeremy expressed, in wonderful online videos and such. So would you share your thoughts on the role of the instructor and how it's changed over the years, and what are those salient points you'd like to share?
Thank you. Well, I find myself nodding with everything that's been said thus far. There's a lot of commonalities and a lot of wisdom being offered out there. So I agree. I would add not only consistency, but predictability. Students feel very comfortable with predictability, and if you change one thing, it seems to really throw them off. So I like Teresa, get everything ready, and it's just like ready, set, go. Now I don't offer it all at once. I filter in material usually based on weekly or bi-weekly kinds of information. So yeah, and I do love the production part. I constantly, I guess I like to keep myself interested. So I always want to find something. I usually look to see what Mike Wesh is doing, see if I can copy anything he's doing. So I love to steal from other people and get ideas like that. Recently, I've started using a little software program called Doodly. You ever use that, Jeremy?
no, I haven't.
It's a lot of fun. You can animate, and it's really cool with those little short clips. I have to work really hard to pare mine down because, like Elaine, I've been doing this for so long. The very first distance course that I was offered, truthfully, I don't remember if I even delivered it, but I remember the moment when DCE, you guys remember DCE, brought the course over to me in a box. And I said, what? And it was a box of VHS tapes. That's how long ago it was. I don't remember ever using those tapes, but that's what it looked like at the time. So we've consistently had to get shorter and shorter and shorter in the different kinds of presentations that we give. And I absolutely agree with Jeremy that those little micro bursts of information that you can give through video are important. I use video a lot, all the time, because again, that's how I connect with my students. For me, and again, I've been teaching online for a long time, but exclusively online since 2012. So I still remember the days that I was in the classroom, in the brick and mortar classroom. And I find myself that I know my online students better than I did in the physical classroom. They reveal a lot if you give them the opportunity and set up the environment where they feel comfortable in doing that. I'm amazed at how much they share and reveal and how personal they get. I use 2 or 3 exercises. Is it okay to do that now? Or do you want to save assignments and things?
Go for it. We're free form here. We've got those guiding questions, but we're good.
You know, like Teresa, you sort of get into a rhythm in your online class, just like you do in the classroom. And what I teach primarily 8-week classes. So that means you really do have to have ready, set, go. And I have a feature in every one of those classes that I call Fast Track. And the first 2 days of class, the first 2 days of an online class, they have a checklist that they have to do. Several little assignments, most of which are either get acquainted or learn something about yourself and others, or they usually do a combination of things, practice some of the functions of Canvas and the kinds of assignment formats that I use. So that gives them the signal, I think, that, oh, you know, pay attention, this is going to be fast paced, let's get ready and go. And one of those first exercises is a little structured poem. It's a template that says, the title is I Am. And so there's a format that they go through and they fill that in. And so that's very revealing. I also have them do their own 30-second commercials, and I have demonstrations for that in which they give their little, if you want to call it an elevator pitch or something like that. So that lets them, and I post all of those so that the rest of the class can see. And finally, I've been using recently 6-word memoirs. And I'm planning to do that with relation to the COVID environment and those changes in our lives. So a little twist on that this fall. And the idea is you describe your life in 6 words. And this is not original with me. It's been around for a long time. It came out from the Smith magazine way back in the day. And the example they gave that inspired this was a newspaper ad that said, for sale, baby shoes never worn. So that tells such a poignant story. And the students come up with amazing kinds of little memoirs like that. And again, we share them. So they also get to know one another, and we do a lot of that in the discussion boards. So I'll be quiet now.
Well, I'm actually going to ask you to take the next one. If you could share a little bit more, you were talking about how you get to know your students better being in the online. If you could talk about how you've noticed the role of the student being different in an online environment, and what are those characteristics that you see in an online student, and how you encourage those students.
Similar to, well, I encourage them by writing them emails as a class and emphasizing contact information and how to do that in various ways. I also require, as much as you can, that they check announcements every day. And I post announcements a lot. So that's the way they keep up with what's going on in class. And usually I'll give them some little surprise or something, you know, that is enticing. If you want them to do anything, you tie points to it. You all know that, right? So we do that a lot. And then what I've noticed is that similar to what Elaine said, and my observation about knowing my online students is they come to me with very personal things in their lives. Sometimes those certainly are class related when they need extra time or situations or any kinds of accommodations, but they also come with other kinds of things that are going on in their lives or needing advice on some particular, you know, education related courses and careers and that sort of thing. And I believe if you build, it's sort of like if you build it, they will come. So I think in nourishing those kinds of environments that they feel an affinity that I actually didn't feel as much in the classroom. Now, I would feel that with, you know, 2 or 3 students, and I would have a good engagement with those 6 students who were on the front row in the physical classroom. But in this one, I have people come forward with some really interesting ideas. Sometimes they want to know about publishing their work, because I will encourage them. You know, there's ways to get your work out there. There's ways to start your resume. There are ways to put yourself out there and showcase what you can do. We do some of that in those 30-second commercials that I was telling you about. So I believe that it is a blended role of being the person in their lives who cares and who they can come back to next year or the year after, or sometimes 10 years later. And that's not everyone, but it's a good number of them, actually. So I think the personal connection is something that they really appreciate and respond to. They also, I think even with myself, with respect to the COVID environment, I'm not all fluff and rainbows and unicorns at all. I have a reputation for being a real hard ass. With the COVID environment, I knew immediately I had to let up on that. So I no longer hesitated about extending deadlines or making accommodations and I don't require them to go through student services again for, you know, missed assignments and that sort of thing. I handle that myself. And people really respond to that. They're just so grateful that you have paid attention and given them the accommodation that they need. I no longer worry, and I think this will be a lasting, it's really interesting because I think this will be a lasting feature for me personally, is that I don't have to be that hard ass all the time. I can provide a lot of structure and guidance, and they do need that. But I can be more accommodating. And I think I will take that with me.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your insights on students. And you mainly work with undergrads of, you know, all years and such. I know that Bob and Elaine would mainly be working with graduate students, and Teresa and Jeremy probably mainly undergrads. So Bob and Elaine, let me ask you about your students and what you notice about the students in the online environment, you know, as working adults for the most part.
Well, it's interesting that my students in the College of Ed, my students are all people who are trying to either earn their master's or doctorate in leadership. And so they're all either teachers or administrators, or some people, like I had a class last spring where people were working for the Kansas Association of School Boards or even KSDE, but they're all educators. And so everybody, once we went to this, they were all wearing, in almost every case, 2 hats as student and teacher themselves, or often three hats. They had their own kids in school who were going through this as well. And so there was, there was a lot of difference of opinion on, I mean, obviously we're all in this horrible situation, but the positive aspects, I mean, there was good and bad. I just think everybody rolled with it, but it's interesting to see during the course of the summer how people's attitudes have changed and they realize what they just went through. And some people are still there. They realize that what happened in the spring was not optimal. They're looking back at their own school district and saying, geez, we were, and then everybody now suddenly, even within the past 2 weeks, I think everybody a month ago was optimistic they were going to be back in August, and now they're not at all. I mean, most people are thinking, we're in this. And so that's what I've noticed. Now, I had 2 classes last spring, and one class we were online all year. It made no difference. But the other group was quite not the usual. It was a cohort group. It was a teachers in Manhattan school district who were in the Leadership Academy, and we were actually in the last semester of a 2-year program. And they actually have this summer, but it's really the last major semester. And so we had been meeting every 2 weeks in person at Manhattan High East for 3.5, 4-hour sessions every 2 weeks. And then boom, we had to switch. It was actually, there were some benefits to it. There was things we liked about it better. But what I found was interesting is that we started off baby steps and go, we can't do 4 hours with people. There was 3 of us instructors. We go, we can't do 4 hours. And we started off like the first time we met was 1 hour and everybody was just kind of a commiserating session. And then we dipped our toe in 2 weeks later and like tried to do a little content. It was funny, by the time we were done, we were actually doing about 3 hours. And so we were able to, people go, well, this is what we have. And so I think, that worked out. But the student wise, I think everybody's attitude was different as a student than it was as a teacher, and different as a parent than it was, and I'm feeling that right now. And I have a 17-year-old high school junior who hates, he likes the aspect of not having to, the reduction of class work was great, but he hated it. And the teachers that he had were begging for students to please, we're trying to join the class, please. And nobody would. The high school's view is this way different. So I don't know if any of you that have your own kids out there have experienced that as well. I'm sure it's different if they're, in kindergarten or something. That's way different. If I had little kids again, I don't know how much, that's bad.
It's been very challenging.
Did for little kids.
Yeah.
But the high school kids are like, and I have an older son who's not going to go back to college. He says, if it's online, I don't want to go.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Yeah, you bring up some really good points about the challenges that folks are going through right now. And the reality is we're going through a grieving process in many ways. And the shock of it, and and also some anger with it, and frustration, and people are really struggling to go with it. Elaine, could you share some thoughts on your students, please?
Yeah. And Bob, I admire you very much. Having young adults, emerging adults, adolescents, itty bitties, dogs, cats, whoever else in the family. And we're supposed to be competent teachers, instructors at the same time that show that we can do Zoom. So that's, it's amazing for us. For my students, I do teach graduate students, and I also teach undergrad. This summer, I'm supervising our undergraduate internships. And those internships are all done online too. And then I do teach undergraduate intersession. So I do the 15-week and an 8-week and a compressed week. And so the changes that I've observed is in the development of the students themselves. I have a psychology degree, a counseling degree, and a human development PhD. And in human development, I kind of thought that the undergrads would be just get it done. Just get it done, give me the content, move through, and give me my grade. And then I thought, well, the graduate, the mature, traditionally how we think about graduate students would want to develop and want to linger and want to expand their horizons and think great thoughts. And that's flipped for me. I think the online graduate student is strategic. They're focused, and they want to get the degree to either find a job, move a job, or amplify their job. And they're strategic, and they appreciate the amount of content, but they also want to move through. The undergraduates want to understand what in the heck's going on with the world, what's going on with them, and how do they fit. And so I find that when I log on and Zoom with my undergraduate students, they want to linger, they want to feel community, they want to understand how they fit. And so I see that change. Human development happens. I mean, each of us are developing in this strange time too. So I think if I can get anything done in any class in any way, it's to help the person move to the next phase of their development, whatever it is. And I appreciate what Jeremy said, how strategic, how beautiful that you decide a year from now what's going to count, you know, and you embed that in the lecture. And I think that's how I'm approaching these students changing. A year from now, what's going to count and how can I help with that? And that's development.
Thank you. I appreciate
Laura,
that.
can I throw one
Yeah.
more thing in here? One of the things that the particularly the Manhattan group had talked about, and it's coming up in my class this summer too, which is across the state, is that this forced a new view of looking at the inequities that students and families have, that everybody knew was always there, and everybody tried to address, and everybody tried to talk about it, but it hit squarely something that it was, you couldn't just talk about it anymore, you had to try to do something about it. And it's made a big difference. And in Manhattan, I mean, they're really, you know, there are probably people who might have kids through the system, or, you know, they're very familiar with Manhattan. I live in Topeka, but it's really hit them squarely, and they really don't know what to do about it. I mean, they're trying. We also had a student from a more rural north central Kansas area that I don't have any internet service in the town. I mean, it's all, you know, so it's forced a different thinking immediately, and we have the same things that's going on our, you know, university wide too, but it's really hit hard. And so we can talk about all the grand and glorious things, we can come up with the greatest things ever, but they can't access it. It doesn't make any difference. So I just decided to throw that in there.
Great point. Great point. I want to give Trace and Jeremy an opportunity to talk about students online, and you both work with undergrads. So what's your experience with your students and the changes that you've seen?
You know, I really haven't seen a whole lot of changes because, again, my class is probably different than most of yours. Students, we don't really hardly have any collaboration with each other in the class. It's purely, can you compute the quadratic formula? If so, you do it on the website and then you turn it in, so on and so forth. The change that's affected my class the most is I normally have them go into a proctor to take their proctored exams, because students are very good at cheating, and especially in lower level math, there are a lot of resources that help them with that cheating aspect, so to say. I mean, there's hundreds of websites and apps where you can take a picture of the problem and your app will just give you all of the work and the answer and so on and so forth. So the changes that I made is I used to have students go into a proctor. I know that other students required Examity, which we now no longer have that as an option anymore. So I had to change how to get students to do the exams, but in a proctored environment, because there's too many resources out there for them not to. So what I've done is I have them record themselves through Zoom, and this actually came from somebody else. I think Brian Linshield maybe
Yep.
developed it. Yep. Okay. So I use that process. And so in the spring, you know, it was very quick change, whatnot. So it was like, just do it with what you can as some of you addressed. Some of them didn't have fast enough internet speeds. Pretty much all of them did have webcams, but some of the internet speeds weren't fast enough to support the video and whatnot. I'm teaching the same classes over the summer, where this summer I've required them to have an external webcam, not just their laptop webcam, because I want to see their space, their workspace, not them. Because if I'm taking an exam right now, I can still take pictures of my problems and still cheat and still not have an instructor know it, so to say. The only problem with that now is there's a shortage of webcams. And so, and shipping is just not as fast. So if you think that, you know, you have to think through exams, you have to think through what resources do students need. And so just think through those things. A lot of students didn't complain about the extra cost of the external webcam, which I understand that, but in my retrospect, it's probably cheaper than them purchasing Examity, but they don't think through that process. And it's also more convenient than I used to have a lot of complaints about having it being a purely online class where students had to go into an actual proctor. They wanted it to be purely online. Well, now that I have it purely online, I have the additional complaint about the cost of the external webcam. So it's all, you know, advantages and disadvantages and whatnot. So again, not a lot of collaboration with my students whatsoever. So that's completely different than what most of your environments looks like. I don't have anything synchronous and whatnot. So just offering a purely different perspective, so to say.
Thank you. I appreciate it very, very much. Jeremy, let's share your thoughts on students.
So that was actually great, what Teresa just said in terms of leading in. So the thing I had originally thought about for this is, for me, the biggest issue I see facing students is kind of related to what I mentioned before, is they really have to become much more, you know, self-learners, or whatever the right phrasing term is, right? And they have to be self-motivated, right? So in a classroom, I can help energize and motivate. It's very tough to do that for me in the online environment, right? I try, but it is a little more difficult versus the in-class environment. So that's really, right, they are guiding them, they are directing themselves much more than I think they normally would. My mentality is probably a lot more like a high school or middle school teacher, I think, when I'm in the classroom, because my wife is a high school and middle school teacher, and she's the one who taught me how to teach because no one else did. So she taught me, and so I actually think I care and am more empathetic with students than I think I might be otherwise. And we can come back to those sorts of things later. But Teresa brings up a good point about the cheating component. So for a subject like math, my wife is a math teacher, so we've had to discuss a lot of these things. It's very different than what, you know, you get away from math and physics, and then you can start getting rid of tests that ask questions in terms of worrying about cheating, right? And so you can structure your exams in a way. So I don't even do exams, right? I actually do projects and assignments that force students to utilize the material and then think critically about it and do something with it, right? So we don't do an exam where we have to worry about cheating because you start off there with the assumption when you do these things, you're assuming they're going to cheat. Students know that, and it's sort of it's a negative relationship, right? You're starting it off in a negative way. Why not, if you can, if you're in a subject area that allows it, to be positive about it. Stop trying to test factual, like individual facts, things that you can look up, and utilize those to do something original and think creatively. And if you're doing that, it's obviously much more difficult to grade and takes more time, but I find that it works really well. I never have to worry about cheating, right? And we do a lot of math in what we do, but even there, it's not something that you can necessarily take a picture of, right? And utilize the apps to find the, to find the answer to a particular formula. So, um, so yeah, I really worry that we have a lot of faculty that want to do exactly what they did before, do tests exactly the same way they did in a brick and mortar classroom. And they try to take that to the online environment, and it fails miserably. And they're worried about all these details that they shouldn't be worrying about. It's better to focus on trying to have students learn how to utilize the material that they have. And that's, for me, it helps structure the class. It's not as stressful. Students don't go into it going, oh, I'm worried about exams. They actually produce really high quality work. And so I've been impressed by that part. But once again, the initial point of it is about self-motivation far more than it is in a normal brick and mortar classroom. That's what I have.
Really great point. Yes, online learning really does need to be self-directed in so many ways, and students who choose it tend to have those skills already or develop them quickly. But we're now dealing with a lot of students who didn't necessarily choose to be online, right? Spring semester and potentially with limited COVID capacity in classrooms, many of our students are going to need to pick up those self-directed skills. And so if you could share, and I'm going to try and get to as many questions as we have here, I'll get back to Katie's original questions as I can, but we had a great question about, how do we help those students take ownership of their learning? And Sue had shared a few of the things she does to kind of set them up to begin with on practicing assignments and getting started right away with the fast track. But if any of you have tips that you can give our other faculty here about how you help your students learn those successful skills to be an online student. Elaine?
Laura, one of the things is I've had to train myself not to intervene too quickly. I break up the students in discussion groups, some leaders, some natural leadership in those groups. Similar to Sue, I have the first 2 weeks of a 15-week class kind of like to acclimate, to try things out, to experiment and fail or succeed. And as I have learned, if you intervene too quickly, the student relies on you, and they'll never learn those self-organization, self-management skills, and then they won't learn how to calm down because they're always amped. They're always trying to meet my demands. So I had to train myself to allow the messiness to happen at the first, and then nourish that, kind of nuance it over time. And I think at the end of a 15-week and also at an 8-week class, they learn to manage themselves and they learn to persist and deal with the strain of the change. That's what I would suggest.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I was just going to say that's really good advice all around. It's like, we talk about helicopter parents, but if we're helicopter instructors, then that doesn't do them any good. So that's a really good point.
I think a well-organized online course is really critical to them knowing what is expected of them, right? Jeremy.
So I would add that I sort of follow a very similar sort of philosophy. However, toward the end, so I really keep track of students, right? And if I notice if there have been 2 assignments that haven't been turned in a row, I'll send a little email, hey, what's up? Let me know what's going on. If you need any help, just let me know, right? If it gets toward the end of the semester and it's a hit or miss student, I'm on them, right? I mean, I just as I did with my own kids, it's, hey, just checking in. There's only this many more days left. I'm usually much more lenient depending upon the context in terms of like late penalties and things like that. I want the students to learn the material. So I know this is going to sound odd, but I could care less about grades, right? I never have. I don't make that a priority with my own kids, my students, with anyone, right? Learn the material. If you focus on the material, who cares about the grade? So if they pack it all in at the end, even though I don't structure the class that way, right? There are deadlines on assignments, right? Every 4 days or whatever the case might be. I actually want them, I would rather them do the material and get something out of it than just not do it and get an F, right? That's a better outcome. And so I think there is for me that, and I'm sure for most of you, right? There's a difference that you don't want to see students fail. And so I probably do a little too much, hand holding at the end to drag students through the process. I do it when undergraduate. So I also do the direct undergraduate research for the university. I drag students. There are hundreds of students that I'm making sure we're keeping track of. And if they're not, I'm emailing them, I'm meeting with them, I'm helping them do what they need to do because I'd rather them have the full experience than give up. But maybe that's a bad thing. Maybe there are those that think something different. So
I think it's a delicate balance for all of us to figure out what works for us in our teaching style and what works for our own hearts and our caring for our students. Being more hands-off certainly doesn't mean that you don't care about your students. You're working on other skills for them and encouraging them. But yes, certainly in this environment and with students who didn't necessarily choose online, we need to be willing to be flexible with deadlines, as Sue had said towards the beginning, and encouraging them and following up with them. I've talked to many different professors who have said, I just had students drop off the map. They weren't responding to my emails. They weren't participating in class. They weren't coming to Zoom sessions. And you do have options with the student life, doing a student of concern report as you go through. But gosh, we've only got a few minutes left. Sue, I didn't give you a chance to share your thoughts on that, did you?
I concur, and I'm learning a lot from you all as well. One of the things I will emphasize is that just because we're teaching online doesn't mean that all of the education and learning takes place online. I make a point to have my students get out of the building, so to speak. And so I give them field exercises, and they always have a project, Jeremy. I agree with that. That's where the real assessment of learning, I believe, comes. I'm having to rethink some of that now in the COVID environment because I've had students, be homeless, and we do weird things in my classes like go to prisons and murder sites. But they love to do that, and everybody has a phone now, an iPhone, a smartphone, and so they can film themselves as they are out in the field, and they really take ownership, and they really like to do that. And if they get engaged in it, then they're also learning because you've given them guidelines about what you expect from them. So not all of that is going to be possible now, and I'm trying to figure out exactly how to meet some of those same balances. Elaine, thinking about some of our other work, I think I'm going to adopt our windshield analysis so that one of the things, while the environment is not safe to send students out into crowded areas, I'm going to suggest that they can do a windshield analysis of, driving through a neighborhood or a town or the countryside or whatever, and guidelines that you might have for them about observation and what you want them to take away from it. So that's one idea. I don't have all of them solved yet.
Well, none of us do. None of us do. All right. I know we didn't get to all of the questions in the chat, and I really appreciate all of our panelists who kind of answered questions as we went through. And I just want to give each of you an opportunity to kind of share your final thought about teaching online, what's most surprising for you, or what you really want to pass forward for folks that are moving into the online realm. And so let me go ahead and start with Teresa.
I'm sorry, can you repeat what you were asked again?
Just that one thought you'd like to share with those that they're just now exploring being online teachers, and what's the biggest thing?
Yeah, don't, just like anything that you're teaching for the first time, don't expect it to be perfect the first time that you teach it. We all know that it typically takes us 3 times before we get very happy with what we're doing. So do the same thing here. If you try something and it doesn't work, don't feel like everything failed. Just note that if we have to do this again, or just use it as a learning tool and move on from it.
Perfect. Thank you. Jeremy.
So my take-home points are really 2 things. Be honest with students. So if you do screw something up, just tell them you screwed something up. They appreciate it. And be empathetic, right? So if you do those 2 things, everything else sort of will work itself out. So honest, empathetic.
Excellent. Thank you. Bob?
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks for doing this, and I've expanded the group of people that I now feel like I know, and I really enjoyed their contributions. And you may be hearing from me because I want to hear from you. I had actually had kind of penciled some of this out, and one of them is that when you look at Canvas and you see all the apps that are there, and it just blows you away, and you don't know what to do if you're like me. There's no way you can learn all those. There's no way you could even touch it. And so then if you try to do too much, is my point, then you're really not going to do anything at all. And so I think a sports analogy is if you're behind in a basketball game by 10 points, there's no 10-point basket. So you just have to take a little bit. So as time goes on, my suggestion is learn the basics that you need, and then dabble just a little bit, try one thing and see how that works. Don't try to do 5, because it just won't, you just won't be happy. And I say that from experience. And so I wouldn't get overwhelmed by looking at that big list of apps, but find out from other people what they like to use. And the other thing is negotiate that a little bit with your class if you can, and see what they want to use. And finally, I did put a comment here. I put it in the chat, but I said younger students don't do email. So we need to meet them where they are. So find some kind of social media group app that works, and agree with that ahead of time. And then you can push stuff out to people and they'll get it. A 20-year-old person is not, did you check the email? They're not going to check the email. It's just not going to happen, but they will have their phone and they will check if you're part of a group. They'll do that.
Great points. Thank you. Yeah, don't be overwhelmed by the technology. Allow one piece at a time, and just expand your repertoire as you go. So Elaine.
Again, echo to you, Laura. Thank you. Thanks to everyone. The piece of advice I would have is know that there's scholarship that supports our trade. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is a way to do online education. There's a way to design a class. There's a way to encourage students to participate. And we need to take advantage of that scholarship.
Thank you. And finally, Sue, wrap it up for us.
I'm going to let Alberto wrap it up. So my hint is be yourself. Don't have the courage to put yourself out there, show your passion, show your excitement. One of the things that you do in front of the camera is exaggerate everything. If you want to wake your students up, we can't pace in front of the classroom like we do in the brick and mortar, but you can do things like this and things like this. And they love it. Every time I show one of the puppies, you know, that gets their attention. And suddenly we're friends because now they know Alberto. I have 3 of them, so I can rotate them around and do things like that. So having that emotion and your willingness to share that with them, I think goes a long way.
Excellent. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. Very valuable to get all of your input. And we will post the recording of this very soon. And we appreciate everyone being here. So y'all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.